Hope and redemption. Today I have a guest that's going to tell us what that means for thousands of people in Hawaii whose lives he's touched personally. And we have a very interesting guest. His name is Judge Steve Alm. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. I wanted to talk to you about your background. I mean, how did you become a judge?
Well, I'm local. I was born and raised here. Went to University High. Worked at Dole Cannery for 4 summers. I boxed out of Kalakaua Rec. I went to UH for 2 years. Then went to University of Oregon for 2. Law school.
Go Ducks.
Go Ducks. Good year. Went to law school in California. Then where my wife worked. Then she went to law school in Minnesota where I worked. Then we came back and I was hired by Charles Marsland at the prosecutors.
Ah.
I was there from 1985 to 1994. Then I was appointed by President Clinton as the United States Attorney for Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And I thoroughly enjoyed both of those jobs. And then in 2001, I became a state circuit court or felony court judge.
So you've had quite an extensive career in law enforcement.
Yes.
For sure. And what were some of the cases that you focused on before? Were they always criminal cases or
as a prosecutor?
Yeah.
Well, when I was the United States Attorney, when I was a city prosecutor, I did the variety of cases. I was a felony team captain, then I was head of district and family court, and did a lot of training of new deputies. A couple of the bigger cases was when police officer David Ronk was murdered. That was the last case I did at the prosecutor's office, and Clyde Pinero ended up getting convicted. He's in for life without parole. I did a few other cases. Michael Cattell, it was the first use of DNA in a courtroom in Honolulu.
Wow. When
we did that case, it had been done in Maui earlier in the year. But I really, and that was important because when I went to the United States Attorney's Office, I made it my #1 priority to get federal and state working together to have cooperation between the systems. And so when I got appointed, I was one of the few United States attorneys who was a career prosecutor. So the police were thrilled when I got the job because I was somebody they knew, somebody they had worked with. The last case being the murder of a police officer. Been in court with, right? Been in court with, worked on those projects with them. So they really were, and we made that the #1 priority. We also did a lot of political corruption cases. Milton Holt. Councilman Marigatani, Danny Quijano.
Walk down memory lane.
Absolutely.
Some of our top politicians in Hawaii.
And, getting Gary Rodriguez may well have been the most powerful person in Hawaii ever to be prosecuted.
He was the head of the UPW, which is the United Public Workers Union, right?
That's right. And he was a, very powerful politician, and yet we don't pick and choose. We go after, as the United States Attorney, whoever is committing crime. And it was really our close relationship with the police department. They ended up calling us up and giving us information. We started a long investigation of Mr. Rodriguez, which ended up with him being successly prosecuted.
And that took a while. That took perseverance because he went through appeals.
Well, it took years just to develop the case.
Yeah.
And, I don't think it's totally coincidental, but the assistant U.S. attorney who did the case in court is Florence Nakakuni, who is now the U.S. attorney.
That's right.
So it worked out extremely well. To show how small our town is, when he had already been indicted, we were waiting for trial, I had a chance to go before the Judicial Selection Commission to be interviewed for a state circuit court judge. He was on the commission.
I remember that.
He had the good grace not to show up for my interview, but the name tag was there.
Oh, dear.
Nameplate. And then the following week, he resigned from the commission.
Oh, okay.
And I think he realized it was just untenable. But he ended up getting convicted. There was a long delay. The case he was let out on bail pending appeal, but he was sent to prison, so he's still in prison.
Oh, okay.
And
his
still
daughter,
in federal prison.
Right? His daughter was involved.
She was convicted as well.
Right, right. So that's quite a story.
It was, but it was, it was one of the examples. We also did a lot of large political corruption cases, but we also did a lot of drug trafficking cases. We did a few police brutality cases, but it was trying to work. It also what got me started in working with the community in the Weed and Seed Project. The day I was sworn in as U.S. Attorney, some folks from the Downtown Neighborhood Board came to talk to me and said, we've got this bar called The Escalator, which is down on Smith Street next to Hotel Street, where they're dealing drugs, and we can't get anybody to stop it.
Wow.
They had talked to the Liquor Commission, they had talked to the City Prosecutor's Office. There was no mechanism. So we did an investigation, we worked with the police department, we ended up seizing the bar. Finally, ready to go to trial, we settled with the building owners, and we were able to do asset forfeiture sharing. We paid off the bank for the mortgage. The government got 60%. The owners got 40%. Now that block is stores and a new police station.
Oh.
So it went from a crack house to a police station.
That's a good ending.
It doesn't get better than that.
Unless you're a crack addict, then you're not happy about that.
But then, and the police got several $100,000 in asset forfeiture money to help supplement the budget and buy bulletproof vests, go to training and the like. It worked out extremely well. But it also, what got me really interested in working with the community, and it taught me how to collaborate. Because when I'd call folks up to ask them to come to the table and have a discussion, they were happy my call wasn't about their being investigated, so they were only too happy to participate.
What can I do to help, right?
And we had a great group that started as the Weed and Seed Executive Committee, including Lowell Kalapa, including Rochelle Gregson, including...
Rochelle is from AUW, Aloha United Way? Or?
She was, and now she's with the Realty Board.
Okay.
Maile Kanemaru, it was with the Y. She's been kind of the driving force behind Weed and Seed, but that was an outstanding program. It cut crime in Kalipalam and Chinatown by 70%.
Amazing.
The police were the first partners. They're still there with like 20 officers working. The program has since expanded to the Pupus area, Streets area in Waipahu and Eva Beach.
Great.
And so, and then they've started a program on the Big Island as well. But it really taught me how to do community building and how to work with people, and I'm kind of a type A personality, so it taught me...
I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I know, it's surprising. It taught me more how to listen to people
Right.
and, working together to get to a common goal.
So the weed part is you get in there and you weed out the drug dealers and then you seed good
And whatever
things,
criminals
right?
going
or any
on.
criminals. Okay.
And then when it's safer and calmer, then you can do all the other community building. You can do Head Start programs. You can do after-school programs. Because parents are not going to let their kids outside to play if it's dangerous.
Right.
But if it's safer, they'll let the kids outside to play. They'll be outside doing things. And when you have people out in the community doing things, less likely for crime to happen. If some criminal activity is going on in your neighborhood, you're going to call 911 and expect results.
Right.
Well, that's the change we had. That's what started happening at Mayor Wright Homes and happened in Kalipalama.
That's
so
great.
It was a great way for me to learn how to do that and see how bringing people together you can get a great result.
That's great. So then how did it work that you naturally when a president changes then you change shifts, right?
That's right. So I put in my resignation. There happened to be an opening in the circuit court bench. I went on the circuit court bench.
Great, yeah.
I did domestic violence jury trials for a couple of years. I did misdemeanor jury demands. And then in June of 2004, when Marie Milks retired, I took over her courtroom felony jury trials.
Okay, now what happened when you got there? What did you find?
Well, what I discovered was that maybe 10% of the cases go to trial, 90% plead guilty. Virtually, of all of those folks, at least 85% end up not going to prison. Maybe 15% go to prison, but 85% get put on community supervision. So that would be probation or a deferral where they can keep the record clean, but they're virtually the same for supervision purposes. So most people would get put on community supervision. And I discovered that the probation system just wasn't working very well for many offenders. I'd get motions to revoke probation, and I could see that the dynamic was the probation officer had tried to work with the offenders. In spite of, some people do great, but many people have problems on probation. And they would have problems with testing positive for drugs, with missing appointments, with not going to treatment and the like. And I discovered that is where our, that was the status quo, that folks would have a lot of problems on probation, and the probation officers didn't have a mechanism to deal with it. We have smart, committed probation officers. They all have college degrees, half have masters, but when people would violate, they didn't have a mechanism to respond right away. So they'd end up giving them a number of chances and try to work with them and threaten them and cajole them and encourage them. But after 10, 15, 20 violations of probation without any concrete response, they would finally often determine this person is not amenable to probation. Let's get them arrested, refer them back to court, and 99 times out of 100, they would recommend to me, send this person to prison for 5, 10, or 20 years.
So what did you do about it? What did you want to change? You want to show us the slide?
Yep.
Okay, sure.
Okay, if just to give you an idea of our population, what we're working with. There are about little over 8,000 offenders on felony probation or deferral on Oahu. Probation officers have these huge caseloads, and many offenders have substance abuse problems, particularly crystal meth. Crystal meth has been our biggest drug of choice here for the last 20 years. And 60% of the tests are positive for meth. Although actually alcohol causes more problems in the criminal justice system than all the drugs put together.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But it's legal, so
Yeah.
that's a
whole
problem.
other problem.
That is a whole other problem. And so what I thought when I was faced with this is, well, what would work? And I thought, how did I raise my son? Particularly when he was younger. I would, you tell him what the rules are, what the expectations as parents are, and then if your child misbehaves, you give them a consequence immediately. It doesn't have to be severe, but it has to be swift and certain, so your child ties together the misbehavior with the consequence. Then they can learn from it and hopefully do something else in the future. It's a pretty simple idea. It's just that the criminal justice system is cumbersome. This kind of thing never happens. Swift and certain just doesn't happen in the criminal justice system. So I wanted that to happen in this program. So I met with Cheryl Lenoy, a gifted probation supervisor. She had been in the system more than 20 years. And she said, this is great. This can bring some accountability to the system. So she was on board. I looked at the statutes, and I thought, we could use our existing statutes. We didn't have to change anything. I then brought together Kevin Takata from the prosecutor's office, Jack Tonaki from the public defenders. I said, our probation system isn't working. We got to try something new. This was not news to them that our system wasn't working.
Right.
But so they were kind of open, and we had all worked together in the past, so they were open to hearing me out. I asked Kevin if he could design a new motion so the probation officers could fill it out in 5 minutes.
And what was it before? Tell me.
Before it was 4 or 5 hours, because they would go through and list every violation and have to write all that up. Then they'd send it to the prosecutors, that was the affidavit, to put a motion to revoke probation on board. Then it would go to the administrative judge, who he or she would sign a bench warrant. Then law enforcement would get it, and some warrants get a lot of high priority, but you can't give everything all high priority. So it would sometimes be the next time the person would get stopped for speeding or committed a new crime, the computer would pop up, this is a motion to revoke. Then the person would sit for 10 weeks at OCCC, our jail, and then come in for a hearing. And the judge's choice that were give them 5 or 10 years in prison, once in a while 20, or put them back on another 5 years of probation, maybe with 6 months or a year in jail. And so what we're doing is deconstructing that motion to revoke and going back to the first violation and every violation from now on. So Kevin came up with a fill in the blanks, tested positive for blank on blank. So they write in methamphetamine and the date. Check it off. 5-minute process to fill it out. Jack Tonaki then said to me, you know, the rules are going to be the same, but you're actually going to enforce them for the first time. Can you, warn our guys about this?
Because he's a public defender.
He's a public defender.
That's right, yeah.
And I thought, well, that's fair. But this was one of those situations where a crisis can be an opportunity. And they were both willing to try something new, because it's going to take more work on everybody's part. My court staff, their deputies, the sheriffs, the probation officers, because instead of letting things collect, you move on the first one. So the person shows up at the probation office, tests positive for drugs, they get arrested at the office. They go to our jail, OCCC. 2 days later, we have a hearing in my court with the attorneys on both sides. Because I was convinced that would be a teachable moment. You know, you use drugs, you admit to it, you go to jail, you come back to my courtroom, prosecutor, public defender, you're in shackles. It forces you to look at yourself and your choices. So I then went to the jail, OCCC. I said, we're starting a new program. You may not notice it at first because a lot of bodies come back and forth, but we hope to grow this. So you might look at your intake procedures. I then knew that law enforcement was really busy. We didn't have any money. We started this with $0 extra. So, but I knew warrant service needed to get an upgrade. So when I was the United States Attorney, we started a high-intensity drug trafficking program here. Senator Noy was extremely helpful in getting that started, and I spoke to the director, Larry Burnett. He said, this is great, when he heard about it. We can do more than arrest people. Let's help out with this. So he called Dutch Hanohano, the marshal.
Right.
We then talked. Dutch Hanohano agreed to use the Federal Fugitive Task Force to serve the warrants for our courtroom. So I had a wanted poster laminated. I brought that into court. And we decided, when you look at the research, if you focus on the people that are most likely to fail, you're going to get the best bang for your buck. And if it works, you can really change the system.
Now, who's most likely to fail?
People that have violent histories, people that have drug problems, whether it's violence against strangers or domestic violence people. We also consider sex offenders violent. They don't tend to violate probation rules as much because I think they're scared of jail, but we don't want them committing new offenses. So I said to Cheryl, could you identify the folks that are currently in your section? And hers was a high-risk group. So people start at regular probation. Some of them fail, they don't go to treatment, or they fail at treatment, they're still using drugs. They would internally transfer from main branch probation to Cheryl's unit. So we started with all the folks that had been sentenced by my courtroom, mostly by Judge Milks, that had ended up in Cheryl's unit. So on October 1st of 2004, we had a warning hearing for the folks that were there.
Okay, you want to show us the slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so again, the target group are these highest risk folks. So sex offenders, people that have failed at regular probation and are headed for revocation, that's the folks that get transferred from main branch to Cheryl's unit, and domestic violence offenders.
So give me your sex offenders, give me your domestic violence offenders, give me all the people that have a really hard time, right?
Exactly right, because if they're most likely to fail and we can stop that failure, we can save a lot of money, it's good for them. Hope turns out to be, and I had no idea it would go as far as it's gone or be as successful, but it is one of those rare win-win propositions where it reduces victimization, it cuts crime, it helps offenders and their families by keeping them out of years in prison, and it saves taxpayers millions of dollars. So we didn't know all this, of course, on October 1st of 2004, but that's when I had a warning hearing following up on Jack Tonaki's suggestion about warning their folks. So I had 18 sex offenders at 8:30, and then I had 16 drug offenders, let's call them, at 10:30. The drug offenders had been convicted of burglaries, thefts, assaults, but had failed at regular probation and had been transferred to Cheryl's Illinois unit. And I told them, everybody in this courtroom wants you to succeed on probation, but you're not cutting it. You're not complying with the rules. So from now on, every violation of probation, you're going to go to jail. Because you're making a deal with me for you not to be in prison, and prison is years in prison. Jail is short-term incarceration or pretrial detention. So for you not to be in prison for years, you're making a deal with me, the judge, that you're going to follow the rules of probation. So from now on, if you test positive for drugs, you go to jail. If you miss an appointment, you go to jail. And if it keeps happening over and over and over, you're going to go to prison, because it means you're committing crimes to pay for your drug use. I said, but if you screw up, and I understand we're human beings, people can forget an appointment, they could make a bad choice and get high, but if you turn yourself in right away, I'm going to give you less time. Hold up the wanted poster. You don't show up for this stuff, these guys are going to come and look for you. And it's embarrassing, people can get hurt, so even if you screw up, turn yourself in, because we're trying to create a culture of personal responsibility for this. Any questions? One guy said, what if I test positive today? I said, that's a good question. Because we're warning you about the way the violations are going to be handled, right now, because you're being honest, we're not going to arrest you today. But you can count on, in the future, getting drug tested. We thought, how could we, and after almost immediately, we started to see a reduction in positive drug tests and missed appointments. And I think I have somewhat of a reputation as a tough judge.
Yes, the hanging judge.
Some people might say that. But that can really help, that I think helped in this situation. Yeah. And I think it was one of those Nixon to China.
Because they knew you were going to come follow through.
That I was going to follow through.
You're going to be tough on them.
That's right.
Right.
And I think it was one of those Nixon to China situations that because of my background, law enforcement was willing to give it a try something new. And I really take my hat off to all these, city, state, federal employees. They don't get paid any more money, but they all stepped up to handle the motions to modify immediately, take people into custody, drop what they're doing to move on this. My staff, instead of scheduling a motion to revoke 10 weeks down the road, had to schedule multiple motions to modify 2 days down the road. Almost immediately, we could see that this was working. And the head of probation suggested, we're trying to do what works, best practices, let's get the Attorney General's office, Paul Perone, involved in keeping statistics. So we knew from the beginning we had a winner. But after a couple of months, I thought, we should find out, we should drug test these folks more often, because they were only getting drug tested when they saw their probation officer, which is once every 2 weeks or once every month. So if they choose to, they could not use drugs for those couple of days. On the other hand, if they tested positive on regular probation, they didn't get arrested anyway. So they were testing positive 45% of the time.
Wow.
It really, so it's one of those things. So I talked to Cheryl Lenoy. She looked at our drug court, and we had a drug court when this started, and drug courts can do a great job. But because you have everybody working and they intensively get into people's lives, they're going to be limited in how many people are in the court. But they have a hotline. So we started the drug test hotline on March 1st of '05. Every weekday morning, all of the folks in Hope that have drug conditions, which is 80 or 90% of them, have to call a hotline. If their color is listed, they have to come to the courthouse to get tested that morning. If they don't show up, warrant goes out. If they show up, they get arrested on the spot. If they test positive, and we move. If they test clean, they can go on about their business. And so during the year of 2005, we kept expanding because all of my folks in Cheryl's high-risk group were in the program. But the POs would call me up and say, Judge, I've got somebody who's with Judge Town or Judge Chan or Judge Wilson. And they say, could we put them in the program? So I'd call up the judge. I'd say, could we move them? They'd say, fine. We'd bring them in. I'd do a warning hearing for that one person. So we expanded throughout 2005. At the end of the year, we thought, let's go to the legislature to get money to expand. I went to see Chief Boise Correa. I had a conversation with him just like you and I are having. He said, so the idea is we've got these thousands of guys on probation. They're committing a lot of the crime. If we put more resources up front into serving all these warrants, then maybe down the road we won't have to investigate the burglary or the car theft. I said, that's exactly what we're hoping. We had Paul Perone's research to back us up. We went to the legislature. We asked for $1.2 million. They gave it to us. HPD said, we'll help serve the warrants. So we use actually most of that, $770,000 for drug treatment slots. More POs, social service aides. So now we have social service aides, which is an entry-level job. They do all the drug testing. And these folks are great. They voluntarily come in at 6:30 in the morning, an hour and a quarter before the courthouse opens.
That's great. That's really early.
It is.
To work.
And so if anybody needs to get to work, all these probationers, or get to job training or a job interview, they can come get an early test. If they test clean, they can go on about their business. If they test dirty, they get taken into custody. So that has been a real help. The attorney generals have kept stats from the beginning. It's all been great, but the old joke in court is an expert witness is a guy from out of town with a briefcase. So once Pepperdine and UCLA heard about this, they came in and they did a randomized control trial study, which means you identify, say, 500 people in main branch probation who were all having drug problems. They were in their mid-30s. They had had an average of 16 or 17 prior arrests for violent crime, property crime, drug offenses, pretty evenly split. And they randomly sorted these names. 2/3 went into the program. 1/3 went into probation as usual, and they were just handled the same. We did warning hearings for all of them, and that's the results that Dr. Angela Hawken from Pepperdine published later on.
Okay. So you want to show us a slide?
Right.
Uh-huh.
All right, and the results were just outstanding. After the first year of observation, the people in Hope were 55% less likely to be arrested for a new crime. And that's the first call I made when I saw these numbers was Chief Correa to say exactly what you were hoping has helped. They were 72% less likely to use drugs. And the folks on Hope are getting on the drug test hotline. So it's random. It's once or twice a week. And the folks on regular probation, it was once a month and they knew ahead of time. They were 61% less likely to miss appointments with their PO. They were 53% less likely to have their probation revoked. I think, but the biggest number was they served or were sentenced to 48% fewer days of incarceration. And it all was in the prison end of it. So they were getting sent to prison for failing probation or committing new offenses 48% less often.
So, okay, so I got a question for you. The governor now, Governor Abercrombie, is talking about bringing prisoners back from Arizona.
Yeah.
And how does your program work with that in helping that big picture plan? Because as you can testify to, there's a big cost difference.
Yeah.
We obviously want less people in prison if we can have less people in prison, if we can do it safely.
Right.
So how does that all work together with your program?
Well, it costs about $50,000 to incarcerate somebody in Hawaii. This is according to the Department of Public Safety. It costs between $27,000 and $30,000 a year in Arizona. The way I see this working, and I had a great conversation with the governor about 2 weeks ago, and we have been trying to work things out. I'm convinced we can start a Hope pretrial effort. That's with the Department of Public Safety. So when people are waiting for their trial, they don't pick up a new charge, at least not as often, because that happens right now. Hope probation is expanding statewide. Chief Justice Moon was supportive of Hope. Chief Justice Rechtenwald is very supportive of Hope. Maui started a year and a half ago. The Big Island is going to start in March. Kauai will be next. So we'll have pretrial. Hope probation will be statewide. And then they're going talking to the governor, they're going to start a Hope parole pilot. I'm convinced if you can do all 3 stages of it, that's where you can reduce your prison population. Because most people end up in prison not from judges at the original sentencing, but because they fail at probation or parole. And then they go into the system. So and then at the same time, I think the Department of Public Safety can look at who is doing their time now in Hawaii or on Arizona, and maybe release some of those folks if you have a system that the public is going to be confident is going to be watching them closer. And that's the beauty of Hope, that whether it's probation or parole, you're watching them like a hawk, and they're going back in every single time they violate. But most of these folks they're going to make the choice. I can choose to stay out, see my PO, and not use drugs. Or I can decide to get high and go back in. Most of these guys are going to make the choice to stay out. Not all of them, but most of them.
So do most people in prison have a drug problem?
Yes.
Okay. Well, before we run out of time, because we only have a minute left, tell me about Hope. Where did you get the name?
Well, we had a contest among the probation officers and court staff. And we got a lot of entries. One of the early ones was Yank and Spank, which, you know...
Sounds a little wild.
A little wild, pretty accurate, but not aspirationally.
Right.
We want to be positive. So somebody suggested Hawaii's Opportunity Probation with Enforcement. And when I heard that, I thought, we've got a great name.
And you've gotten national recognition.
We have gotten national recognition. We've gotten programs started in several states. The federal government, they've introduced a bill to call for it in Congress to set up 20 Hope pilot sites. Alaska started a great program about 6 months ago, and it's being looked at all over because there are 4.3 million people on probation in the United States, and a lot of people have the same problem with it not working.
Right.
And we think we may have found, created a better mousetrap. We may have, but it's not a miracle. It takes everybody working harder and smarter.
Right.
And I think that's the key to it. That I'm as tough on crime as anybody, but we got to try a new way.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to, what's your website?
It's at hopeprobation.org.
All right. Well, we'll have people log into that. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so thrilled that Judge Steve Baum got to come. Look forward to success in the future. I'm Leah Zimmerman, and this has been News Behind the News. Aloha.
Thank you.